Chuong Nguyen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we've met through you have your own podcast, Unlicensed Philosophy. Can you tell me, how did you get started with that podcast and where did the name come from?
The first name of it is called Musically Speaking because at that time I was more inclined to talk about music. I still do, but over time the show has broadened its range of interests, and myself also, and it includes philosophy and politics and basically socio-cultural commentary. So I find it apt to change the name. And the name change was fairly recent. It's like 2 months ago.
And what gave you the inspiration to want to start a podcast?
I like talking to people, and however, at every region that I happen to be in, there are not too many interesting people to talk to.
How do you go about sourcing the guests for your podcast?
Chances are I listen to a lot of podcasts, and if I find some of the guests in that particular podcast interesting, I would find a way to reach out to them, mostly via email, and there's a good chance that they will respond. At first, and it was a hard time finding people to talk to, but nowadays I guess people are somewhat familiar with my show and all that, so I don't have to worry about finding guests.
Amazing. Yeah, you're up to episode 134, I believe.
Well, recently 135.
Nice. Okay. I'm interested in some of your political beliefs. You've explained to me that you're a conservative, or you lean more conservative. Would you be able to explain to me in your own words what that means?
I guess in the Anglo-American sense, being conservative means a fusion of being a libertarian or classical liberal and a traditionalist, in that you care about preserving the classical liberal political philosophy that was handed out to us by Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and John Stuart Mill, all these people. But at the same time, you have to be cognizant of the foundations of what we call Western civilization, and that entails the Greco-Roman heritage as well as the Judeo-Christian heritage, as well as the conflicts that both of those traditions can have, because there are different ways of viewing the world as well as humanity's place in it.
So, in your view, a conservative is somewhat of a classical liberal?
I believe that's what the modern conservative movement, founded by William F. Buckley Jr., was based upon. I know that nowadays there are a host of really thoughtful people who have suggested that conservatism should not be misconstrued for classical liberalism. So they are more traditionalist oriented. Say, Yoram Hazony, who written an entire book titled Conservatism, a Rediscovery, in which he argues such a point.
So whereabouts did you grow up, Chuong, and where are you? You're currently living in Austria, but where have you lived in the Western world?
Oh, Canada.
So you've always voted for, say, the Conservative government over there?
Well, I'm a foreign resident, so I was not allowed to vote. But if I do have a chance, I would I'd rather vote for the Tories.
Okay. And would you say there's a difference between being a social conservative and a political conservative, and a social liberal and a political liberal? My understanding is they have, one is mainly cared about policy and the other is mainly cares about culture.
Yeah, that's a quite interesting question. I think there are certain differences, although the political and the social conservatives would be in the same crowd, and the political and social liberal would be in the same crowd. I'm sure that there are internal differences among the two. Like I just mentioned, how Yoram Hazony, who's more or less a social conservative, disagrees with the political conservative, i.e., the classical liberals. But I understand that in the liberal camp, there are such disagreements too, but perhaps someone who is of the center-left liberal political persuasion should answer it more better than I do.
Yeah, right. And these political positions, while they're on a spectrum, something like being a conservative is also a spectrum in and of itself, right?
Yes, yes. Actually, there are. You should read this wonderful book by Matthew Continetti called "The Right, the 100-Year War for American Conservatism," and I was very honored to have him on as a guest on my podcast, and we talk about that book too. He argues that conservatism is not like a monolithic term, and you can understand why the divisions among the conservatives during the Trump presidency by being attentive to the fact that being conservative means different things to different people. For example, you have the religious conservatives who are who tolerate but do not advocate for classical liberalism. They would prefer a larger space for religion in public life. And you have the neoconservatives who are more foreign policy based, and they would argue that the U.S. of A. should spread its values across the world. And you have the reaction to the neoconservatives, aka the paleo conservatives, who argue for a much more restrained American foreign policy. And the biggest representative amongst them is Patrick Buchanan, and I certainly believe that Buchanan paved the way for Donald Trump to be the president.
What do you think about Donald Trump as a president?
As a human being, he is awful, and he should just stay hosting The Apprentice. But as a president, there are a number of his policies in which many many in the conservative world would agree upon. So if you look at the policy perspective alone, then he is a true blue conservative. But when you add in the personality and the conspiracy theorizing and such, he is a bona fide demagogue.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people from my side of the world, I'm in Australia and New Zealand at the moment, saw. They just saw this disgusting man. I mean, the way he conducts himself is more or less kind of gross, but I did wonder about policy, because when I've been to America and I've met Trump voters, they talk about policy and how he made petrol much cheaper. And so what were some of the good beneficial policies that he implemented?
I think my two biggest areas of concern policy-wise are economic and foreign policy. So I guess I'll narrow myself down to that. Economically, he basically follows the model of supply side that that was debuted during the Reagan era, which is cutting taxes to high income earners so that they are incentivized to produce more and to contribute their taxes to the national government rather than keeping their income offshore. And in terms of foreign policy, he presents a much more conservative version of internationalism after the, what do you call it, like unrestrained version of liberal internationalism of Bush 43 and the overly restrained version of Barack Obama.
Are you able to just quickly explain like what you mean by foreign policy?
Well, it is defined as how a nation state conceives of the world outside of it.
A lot of people think conservatives, they just want to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. What do you think of that notion? Is there any truth to it, or is it a oversimplification or not true at all?
If you're a conservative in the Anglo-American sense, you believe that everybody has an equal chance of participating in the economy. Because of that, the virtue in which conservatives often invoke is industry and I guess self-madeness. I'm reading this great book here called Coming Apart by Charles Murray, in which he argues that industry, or the idea of making something out of yourself, is part of the American founding ethos. And for that, we are against certain viewpoints that, the scales are tipped in favor of those who are already rich and against those who are already poor. And while I understand that the wealth brings you a lot of power, and you create a power imbalance between yourself and those of lower income than you, it does not mean that you, as a wealthy person, will stay wealthy forever, and those of the lower income bracket will stay in that bracket forever. One of the very misleading statistics that I believe it was Thomas Sowell who pointed this out to me, that you say that the richest 1% owns this much of wealth and such, but if you look at it closely, there is no evidence pointing to the fact that it's the same rich 1%. So that number of 1% consists of different people at different times, and that simplified statistic, so to speak, failed to mention the fact that many of the poorest have over the years become landed at the middle class, and the bottom 20 or of income earners are filled with different people than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago.
Okay, so and my understanding is conservatives promote a more capitalist society, but a lot of people believe, people in the lower class aren't able to move up and get out of their situation through the system that conservatives promote.
I guess conservatives do disagree on the value of the free market and free trade, actually. There is a school of conservatism that believes that free trade is harmful because it outsources labor that's supposed to be filled by American jobs, and they just push it to outside countries like, say, China for the cheaper labor, but then you also foster bad labor practices. But nevertheless, when you look at, say, the forefather of capitalist economics, Adam Smith, you have to look at him through both of his greatest works. When it comes to Adam Smith, people just says he wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is the defense of capitalism, the free market, and self-interest for the greater good and such. But he also wrote another work called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he believes that in order for a system of free market to work, so to speak, a large part of the population must have a moral fiber or moral compass. If not, then the unscrupulous folks will be free to scam other people who do not know any better. In terms of the workers, he certainly believes in a version of a labor theory of value that supposes that natural resources, when applied with human labor, becomes property, and therefore he defends the right to property for everybody, and he believes that it is the cornerstone of your freedoms.
A lot of young people are saying things, starting to identify as Marxist, or say things like, we need to dismantle the capitalist system. Why do you think that is?
I believe it is because, there are certain external factors in the recession of 2008. There are also the belief that the system of the free markets that have benefited their parents and their grandparents have not benefited them as such. You hear statistics about people who, at the same age at the same age, their parents have, say, owned a house or made a family. And you hear how today people don't have families anymore. They don't even have houses of their own. Um, so they believe that is due to, unfettered capitalism, and they believe, the Marxist communist way is. But I guess what they are missing is that the free market is an instrument of poverty reduction. Practically the best in the world. It has lifted millions of people out of poverty, and it is the cornerstone of other freedoms that follow the ones that they are enjoying. And that if applied, if the Marxist theory is applied, then um, their environment would be in a much worse shape, because as much as Marxist vision is inspiring and compelling, whatnot, it has been executed in various failed states, some of which are still, are still trying it. For example, the People's Republic of China and my own country of origin, which is Vietnam.
So Vietnam today is still socialist or communist?
No, the official name is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. The ruling party
Okay.
is the Communist Party.
So the country operates under a communist economic system?
Well, we're using the China model, which is allowing some form of free market in the country, but nevertheless, some of the biggest industries are still nationalized.
Okay, great. Okay, let's go back to you as a conservative. There's another notion where people think conservatives want to control everyone else. They don't want other people to have rights. They don't want women to have abortion rights, gay people to get married. Like, they want to uphold their own sort of traditional life, but they want to impose it on everyone else. What would you say to that?
So this is funny because I just got off a conversation with a professor from Eureka College, which is incidentally Ronald Reagan's alma mater. And we were talking about the notion of rights, and how the founders of the American Republic would define it, and versus the way that Franklin Delano Roosevelt would define it. You see, one of Roosevelt's most famous speech, in it, he proposes a second Bill of Rights, the one that, to amend the Bill of Rights that the founders already had, plus the amendments that were born out of the Civil War and Reconstruction and all that, in which he argues that certain rights should be amended, the right to decent housing and fair wages and medical care and adequate food and such. So the way I see it, the objections to conservatives is, restriction of certain rights is merely or mainly different views of what are rights clashing. So the conservative, view of rights is that these are the things that the state should not intrude upon. So the right to free speech is the right of the government not to restrict or abridge any form of speech or assembly that an individual does. The right to private property means that the state cannot appropriate your house, your car, or whatever without your consent. Nevertheless, the modern liberal view and particularly those who believe that abortion should be a right, are share a different conception of rights, and that is, they believe that rights are the things that the state provides and not a higher authority than the state, and the state is conceived to meet these needs of everybody, especially the downtrodden. So these rights are, added in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt tradition to be things that the state is obligated to do to protect individuals from, say, poverty and and want and all that. So we have a clash of what rights are.
Okay, so say if a woman wants to get an abortion and someone on the conservative feels like she shouldn't have the right to get an abortion, is you saying that's a different view of rights? Because my understanding is that backtracks on what you said. Like the state is telling her she is not allowed to do that. Isn't that sort of impinging on her freedom?
I guess that goes into the different conception of rights. So a woman theoretically who wishes to appeal to the right to have an abortion is appealing to the fact that she, as a sovereign being, is allowed to do whichever she wants with her body, and is the state who is preventing her from doing that. But on the conservative side, we would argue that, well, one of the fundamental rights is the right to life, and we believe that the growing fetus is a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And so by engaging in this procedure, you're taking away a human life, and we find that objectionable.
Okay, what about a policy like gay marriage? What's the difference there between a conservative and a liberal?
I believe it was Prime Minister David Cameron of England. And so Prime Minister David Cameron, when he signed into law, the legalization of gay marriage in England, he says that I'm not co-signing gay marriage because, despite being conservative, I do so because I'm a conservative. So there's certainly a conservative case for gay marriage. It was first made by that brilliant British American journalist and commentator Andrew Sullivan. But if I were to strong man or steel man, the the conservative objectors to gay marriage, is that say, again, I'm not sharing the belief that a marriage should be solely heterosexual. So I'm kind of taking it for granted that it is all right for gay people to marry. But the opposite view would state that what is the purpose of marriage? And they would answer it to be, it is to procreate, to make children, and to continue the human species as such. And because a gay couple, unless using external technologies, cannot naturally conceive of a child, that is not considered marriage, so to speak, because it violates the defined purpose of marriage.
So how did you change your view?
It's simple. I never do. I've hold my beliefs constant that I guess it's okay for gay people to marry, and it doesn't mean that I guess as many conservatives would fear that they would redefine marriage to expand it to, say, man versus beast and man versus him or herself and whatnot. It, as Andrew Sullivan would say, the expanding the right of marriage to gays and lesbians actually solidifies the definition of marriage, and it strengthens the institution of marriage. It helps both the straight population in seeing that, hey, gay people are capable and willing to commit to a long-term partnership, and it helps gay people and lesbians in that they have a solid institution in order to engage in a committed long-term partnership. For, you see, before gay marriage was made into law, there were a lot of what you call it, casual, sex between, the population, especially gays. I mean, you have the term, right? What's it? Not swinging, but cruising, right? Cruising. It just refers to random hookups. I mean, that's the title of the Al Pacino movie, right?
Interesting. Okay, so just because you're a conservative doesn't mean you hold all the well-known conservative beliefs. That's good to know, I guess. And it's interesting how you say, how you can differentiate between different types of conservatives. I want to bring it back to your podcast before we wrap up. What's next for you for the podcast, and how long do you think you'll be doing it for?
I guess until I get tired of it. So there's no definite ending to it. Yeah, I'll be interviewing more people who I believe to be thoughtful thinkers. They do not have to be conservative. They can be liberals and libertarians.
So if people want to find you, where should they go?
I guess they can follow me on the Substack link, which I'll send it to you. I mean, it still goes under musicallyspeaking.substack.com because apparently the domain cannot be changed. And I guess Spotify would be another podcast outlet along with other usual sources in which you can find podcasts.
I'll be sure to link all that in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on today, Chuong.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, thanks.